my perspective and my experience is the guy's going to beat a girl. I'm 32. I train with 16-year-old guys that I'm like maybe 10 pounds heavier than, but like they dust me. I get wrecked by kids, boys and girls, but like the guys, like I feel endangered, no question. Boys and girls will compete against each other up until I think the year they turn 15 going on 16. That's when the age category juvenile 1 exists.
That's very interesting though. So 15 and under, boys and girls compete against each other.
Mm-hmm.
That says a lot to me. That's very indicative of the fact that although girls and boys start out on somewhat equal footing, clearly that diverges significantly once they hit puberty or once they've gone through puberty.
That decision has got to have been made deliberately with an eye towards safety for the competitors. I think it's tricky where it's like you want to respect that people want to live the way that they want to live, but to call, a person who was born a woman, went through female puberty, a coward for not wanting to face somebody who went through male puberty with all of its advantages, if we're talking about fairness and advantages, unless you're going to tell every female athlete to start like doping and using tests, I don't see how the hormonal suppression is necessarily the right or the complete answer to that question.
So speaking of doping, you were sort of alluding to this earlier, but it seems like there is at least some of that in jiu-jitsu.
Oh, yeah.
In your opinion, would a trans athlete competing against a woman, is that sort of on the same level of unfairness? Because it's funny, no one argues that, oh, they should be allowed to dope. Because if you compare the two, doping and a trans athlete competing, then you start to see how ridiculous some of the arguments really are.
And I think we're largely talking about biological men who, choose to transition to becoming women. And I find that those cases are a lot more covered than the other way around.
Like which women, exactly is the point. I mean, if a woman becomes a man, she's certainly not going to have an advantage over biological males.
I mean, and all power to the trans men who like go after and do that, because I think you're starting at a huge loss in terms of the biology. There is a non-nominal volume of women who get into jiu-jitsu due to sexual abuse, self-defense, domestic violence, like not a small number. I find it really problematic if someone's a domestic abuse survivor decides, hey, like I'm choosing to compete in jiu-jitsu because this is empowering for me. And then some guy says, today I identify as female, goes in and just wrecks her. I don't see that as a far cry from things that could happen. The NCAA stuff with Leah is an example that this can go to the most exposed higher levels of sport. And I think the stakes are higher, however, for something like jiu-jitsu or for MMA or something like rugby where there's significant contact. I think for like running and swimming, like you're going to stay in your lane in the race. For something like rugby, like you're going to tackle somebody. Something like jiu-jitsu, you're applying pressure on a choke or on a joint lock that you could really mess somebody up. So, I mean, I train a gym where there's a crop of young kids who are being primed to potentially go pro with this if they so choose. And I'm trying to imagine a situation in which one of the guys decided one day, like, nope, I'm going to compete in, the women's division, finding, talented female athletes and nurturing their growth and success and incentivizing it is hard enough without adding a trans woman into the mix in the competitive sport.
When I've written about this in the past, I've called that a new glass ceiling for women.
Right. I read your piece.
Which is why 21 states have passed or are considering legislation to restrict transgender athletes from participating. And they can still play soccer, but they just need to play on the boys' team and not the girls' team. A lot of the criticisms are blown completely out of proportion. No one's saying that they can't play sports.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's not even a question.
Yeah. And I mean, what happened with Riley Gaines for whatever moment of speaking out and just getting vilified? Like, I think that there needs to be a willingness to engage on both sides of the house.
Speaking of solutions, so I do think that the non-binary category is an intriguing one. One headline read, 27 non-binary athletes are running the Boston Marathon. The division is a sanctuary amid a rise of anti-trans legislation. When I saw that this marathon had added a non-binary category, I thought that was amazing news. I thought that was great because women don't have to compete against trans women. But this headline is making it seem like conservatives would think this is terrible. It's not about prejudice. It's about fairness. The World Swimming Governing Body, FINA, their new gender inclusion policy, this is interesting, only permits swimmers who transitioned before age 12 to compete in women's events. And they proposed like the non-binary category and open competition category. And they're saying, this is not saying that we're encouraging people to transition by the age of 12, but it's just what the scientists are saying, that if you transition after the start of puberty, you have an unfair advantage.
Like, I hate to say it makes sense, but I mean, it matches what I see in jiu-jitsu, where, you know, they cap it at 15, and then it's like, nope. At that point, we assume that puberty's hit, and the guys, even if they were training contemporaneously with girls, even since like age 5, there's going to be a difference there, and it isn't safe for a natal female. And I'm certainly not an expert, but I can say that the 16-year-old boys can beat the piss out of me, and I would not want to face one of them in a women's division. I hardly want to face them in the training room. I feel it for days after going hard with those guys.
And there you have it.